April 14, 1988. The Persian Gulf, near Bahrain. The frigate USS Samuel B was conducting a routine transit through the central Persian Gulf when her lookout spotted something in the water ahead that every sailor in the Gulf in 1988 had been trained to fear. Mines. Iranian mines, laid in shipping lanes during a period of the Iran-Iraq War when Iran had been conducting a campaign of mining and attacking neutral shipping in the Gulf in retaliation for what it perceived as American support of Iraq. The crew of the Samuel B attempted to back away from the mine they had spotted, executing the careful astern movement that naval procedure specified for exactly this situation. The ship struck a second mine that had not been spotted. The explosion tore a hole in the frigate's hull below the waterline, broke her keel, and started fires that her crew fought for hours using the damage control training that every American warship's crew received and that, on this night, would determine whether the Samuel B survived. She survived. 10 sailors were injured. The ship herself required extensive repairs that took months, but the crew's damage control efforts kept her afloat and operational enough to be towed to safety. The mine that had nearly sunk the Samuel B was identified, through its serial number and construction characteristics, as Iranian, part of a minefield that Iranian forces had laid in shipping lanes used by neutral vessels including the reflagged Kuwaiti tankers that the United States Navy had been escorting under Operation Earnest Will, the American military presence in the Gulf that had been established to protect international shipping from the Iran-Iraq War's spillover effects. The American response to the mining of the Samuel B was decided at the highest levels of the United States government within hours, and it reflected a calculation that had been building for months as Iranian attacks on neutral shipping and American naval forces had escalated. The response would be proportional in the specific sense that military planners use the term, meaning that it would be calibrated to send a message about the cost of continued Iranian aggression without escalating to a level that risked broader war. But within that proportionality, the American response was going to be unmistakable in its message. Operation Praying Mantis, launched on April 18, 1988, 4 days after the Samuel B struck the mine, was designed to destroy specific Iranian military assets that had been identified as legitimate military targets connected to the mining campaign and to Iranian attacks on shipping, while demonstrating American naval power in a way that Iran's military leadership could not misunderstand. The targets identified for the operation were 2 Iranian oil platforms in the Gulf, the Sassan and Siri platforms, which American intelligence had identified as having been used to support Iranian naval operations including the deployment of small boats that had been conducting attacks on shipping, and any Iranian naval vessels that engaged American forces during the operation. The American naval force assembled for Operation Praying Mantis included multiple surface combatants, with the battleship USS Missouri's task group providing additional firepower, and carrier-based aircraft from the USS Enterprise providing air support. The first phase of the operation, the destruction of the Sassan platform, proceeded with the methodical precision that American naval operations of the era had developed. American destroyers approached the platform, gave warning to the Iranian personnel aboard to evacuate, and when the warning was acknowledged and the personnel began evacuating, the destroyers opened fire with naval gunfire that systematically destroyed the platform structure. The Iranian forces aboard the platform did not surrender quietly in every case. Some Iranian personnel attempted to man anti-aircraft guns mounted on the platform and fired on the approaching American helicopters and ships. The American response to this resistance was immediate and overwhelming. Naval gunfire and helicopter-launched missiles that eliminated the resistance and continued the systematic destruction of the platform structure. The Sassan platform was reduced to a burning wreck within the engagement's opening hour. What happened next, in the waters around the second target platform and across the broader Gulf as Iranian naval forces responded to the American attack, became the largest engagement between American and Iranian naval forces in history and one of the most one-sided naval engagements of the late 20th century. The Iranian Navy that responded to Operation Praying Mantis included frigates, missile boats, and smaller patrol craft, vessels that represented a significant portion of Iran's operational surface naval capability. The Iranian frigate Sahand, a British-built Vosper Mark V frigate that was one of the most capable vessels in the Iranian Navy, sortied to engage the American forces. The Sahand fired on American aircraft and was identified as a hostile combatant. American carrier aircraft from the Enterprise, A-6 intruders armed with Harpoon anti-ship missiles and laser-guided bombs, engaged the Sahand in an attack that combined missile strikes with precision bombing. The Sahand was struck by multiple Harpoon missiles and laser-guided bombs. The damage was catastrophic. Fires that the missile and bomb hits started spread through the ship, reaching her magazines, and the resulting explosions broke the frigate apart. She sank within hours of the engagement beginning. The Iranian frigate Joshan, a smaller combatant-class missile boat, also engaged American forces, firing a Harpoon missile at the American cruiser USS Wainwright. The missile missed. The Wainwright and accompanying destroyers returned fire with their own weapon systems, and the Joshan was struck by multiple hits that left her dead in the water and burning. She was finished off by additional fire and sank. Iranian Boghammer speedboats, the small fast attack craft that Iran had been using for the harassment attacks on shipping that had been part of the broader pattern of Gulf hostilities, attempted to engage American forces in the confusion of the broader engagement. American helicopter gunships engaged these vessels, sinking or damaging several of them. The engagement that followed the destruction of the Sahand and the Joshan continued through the day as additional Iranian vessels that had been identified as participating in the hostilities were engaged and, in most cases, destroyed or driven off. By the end of April 18, 1988, the results of Operation Praying Mantis were assessed, and the assessment reflected an outcome that exceeded what the planners of a proportional response had necessarily anticipated, though it was an outcome that the disparity in capability between the American and Iranian naval forces involved made, in retrospect, unsurprising. 2 Iranian oil platforms destroyed. The frigate Sahand sunk. The missile boat Joshan sunk. Multiple smaller patrol boats sunk or damaged. American casualties were limited to 2 Marine aviators killed when their helicopter crashed during the operation, an accident unrelated to enemy fire. In a single day, the United States Navy had destroyed or severely damaged a substantial portion of Iran's operational surface naval combat capability in an engagement that began as a response to a mining incident and that demonstrated, in terms that the Iranian military leadership could not misinterpret, the consequences of continued attacks on American naval forces and on the shipping that those forces were protecting. The technological and training disparity that produced this outcome was significant. The American forces involved in Operation Praying Mantis represented the product of the systematic post-Vietnam reconstruction of American military capability, ships and aircraft equipped with sensors and weapon systems that gave them detection and engagement ranges that exceeded Iranian capabilities, crews trained to standards that the Iranian Navy, degraded by years of war with Iraq and by the broader effects of the Iranian Revolution on military professionalism, could not match. Vice Admiral Anthony Less, commanding the American naval forces in the operation, described the engagement in terms that captured both its tactical character and its strategic intent. "We were not looking for a fight," Less said afterward. "We were responding to an attack on one of our ships. But when the response required engaging Iranian forces that chose to engage us, the outcome reflected the gap between what we had and what they had. That gap was significant. The message that Operation Praying Mantis sent was not a message we had to manufacture. It was a message that the engagement itself sent, by what happened when Iranian forces engaged American forces in the open Gulf. The strategic effect of Operation Praying Mantis extended beyond the immediate naval engagement. Iran's pattern of attacks on neutral shipping and on American naval forces in the Gulf, which had been escalating through 1987 and early 1988, diminished significantly in the months following the operation. The demonstration of what American naval power could accomplish when Iranian forces engaged it directly was a factor, among several factors related to the broader trajectory of the Iran-Iraq War, in Iran's eventual acceptance of the ceasefire that ended that war in August 1988. The Samuel B. Roberts, whose mining had triggered the operation, completed repairs and returned to service, continuing the naval career that the name carried forward from a destroyer escort that had fought at the Battle off Samar in 1944, the small ship that had attacked Japanese battleships and cruisers with everything she had until her ammunition was exhausted. The connection between the 2 ships that bore the name Samuel B. Roberts, separated by 44 years, was not lost on the Navy or on the sailors who served aboard the frigate in 1988. Both ships had been damaged in combat in the Persian Gulf and the Philippine Sea respectively, by enemies who had underestimated what American naval power would do in response. The 1944 Samuel B. Roberts had fought battleships until she had nothing left to fight with and had sunk doing it. The 1988 Samuel B. Roberts had survived a mine that should have sunk her, and 4 days later, the United States Navy had responded with a demonstration of force that destroyed a significant portion of an entire nation's naval combat capability. Operation Praying Mantis remains, decades later, the largest engagement between American naval forces and a foreign navy since the Second World War, and one of the most decisive single-day naval engagements in modern history. It is studied in naval staff colleges as an example of proportional response that, through the specific gap between the forces involved, produced results that exceeded the proportional intent. It is also, in the specific way that successful operations sometimes are, less remembered by the broader public than its significance warrants, overshadowed by the larger conflicts and the more prolonged engagements that have defined American military history in the decades since. What happened on April 18, 1988 was this. A mine damaged an American frigate. 4 days later, the United States Navy responded by destroying 2 Iranian oil platforms, sinking an Iranian frigate, sinking an Iranian missile boat, and damaging multiple other Iranian vessels, in a single day's engagement that demonstrated the consequences of attacking American naval forces in terms that no subsequent Iranian action in the Gulf, for years afterward, came close to repeating. The Samuel B. Roberts had been mined. The response was Operation Praying Mantis. That was the message. It was received.